This is probably the most famous picture of a climber, frozen in time on the tallest mountain in the world. Mount Everest stands as a colossal wonder of nature. It's drawn humans to its slopes for thousands of years. It cast an unbreakable spell on climbers, dreamers, and adventurers alike. To reach its summit is the ultimate achievement, one that requires years of intense training and an unshakable drive. But even for the world's most skilled mountaineers, Everest remains a deadly adversary, a place where even the smallest mistake can turn a dream into a final resting place. Over 200 bodies rest frozen along the trails, preserved perfectly by Everest's relentless Arctic cold. Some appear as though they've only just fallen, their faces and gear frozen in a moment, like time has stopped just for them. These bodies, some decades old, serve as eerie mile markers for those who attempt the ascent. Climbers and Sherpas alike pass these silent figures, each one a haunting reminder of the risks that come with venturing into this unforgiving realm. At Everest's daunting altitude of nearly 29,000 feet, or over 5 miles, rescue operations are almost impossible. The oxygen levels are so low that helicopters can barely reach these heights, and the terrain is too treacherous for retrieval teams. Even those who have tried to bring others down have sometimes lost their own lives in the attempt. And so, most who die here remain trapped forever, stranded as ghosts of the past. Everest doesn't just challenge you, it keeps a part of you if you fall short. As always, viewer discretion is advised. Picture this. You've made it to the top of Everest, dodging frostbite, avalanches, and total exhaustion. But while your crampons grip the ice on the other side of the world, what's gripping your data? Without Surfshark VPN, your online security is hanging by a thread thinner than the air at 29,000 feet. Surfshark VPN acts like the ultimate safety harness for your digital life. It keeps your personal data encrypted and hidden from hackers, advertisers, and snooping governments. Whether you're browsing from your chair at home or an open Wi-Fi network anywhere in the world, Surfshark ensures no one can spy on your activity or steal your private information. And here's the kicker. Surfshark lets you access content from anywhere in the world. That means bypassing those frustrating "not available in your region" messages. Want to stream documentaries about adventurers on the other side of the globe? With Surfshark, your IP address isn't stuck in one location. Just like the best explorers, it's free to roam. When I was in Nepal in March to trek Everest Base Camp, I could still catch some Netflix if I wanted as I recovered, without a bunch of annoying hoops to jump through. Here's where it gets even better. My viewers get an exclusive, massive discount to secure their online life and explore the web without limits. Go to surfshark.com/extremeedge to get 4 months completely for free. And if you don't love it, Surfshark has a 30-day money-back guarantee. Click the link in the description to take advantage of this deal. It's cheaper than a cup of coffee and way more useful in keeping you safe. So, while you're watching these high-altitude disasters, make sure your digital life is grounded in safety with Surfshark VPN. Protect your data, access global content, and climb to new heights of online security, all with a click. Trust me, it's a game changer. Let's start with one of Everest's earliest and most iconic stories. The mystery of George Mallory, a man whose ambition to conquer Everest would make him a legend, even in death. Born in 1886 in England, Mallory was a school teacher and served as a soldier during World War I, but he was best known for his incredible passion for mountaineering. To Mallory, climbing wasn't just a hobby, it was his life's calling. And in the 1920s, no challenge loomed larger than Mount Everest. Back then, no one had ever stood on Everest's summit. It was the ultimate frontier, the highest point on Earth. And climbing it wasn't just about personal glory. It was seen as a national endeavor, something like the space race between the United States and China today. The British, in particular, saw Everest as a chance to show the world the strength of their empire, and Mallory was their chosen hero. He had been part of 2 earlier expeditions to Everest in 1921 and 1922, both of which just fell short of the summit. And by 1924, he was ready to try again. The plan was to establish a series of camps along Everest's northern face, each one higher than the last. The final camp, at about 26,800 feet, would serve as the launch point for the summit attempt. At this altitude, the air is so thin that the human body begins to shut down. Every moment spent there is a race against time. In high-altitude expeditions like Everest, climbers often depend on Sherpas, local guides who carry heavy supplies and assist with navigating the dangerous slopes. Their strength and familiarity with the terrain make them invaluable partners on the mountain, particularly in life-threatening conditions. Although the expedition was carefully planned, they faced incredible challenges. Climbing technology in those days was practically primitive compared to what we have now. Mallory and his team wore woolen clothing and hobnailed boots, which provided little protection from the bone-chilling cold. Supplemental oxygen was still experimental, and many climbers, including Mallory himself, questioned whether it was ethical to use. But despite these limitations, they were eager and determined to reach the summit. On June 8, 1924, Mallory and his climbing partner, 22-year-old Andrew "Sandy" Irvine, left their high camp for their summit push. Irvine was chosen for the climb not just for his climbing skills, but for his expertise with the experimental oxygen equipment, which the team hoped would give them an edge. The pair carried as much as they could manage: ropes, ice axes, and a small Kodak camera to document their achievement if they reached the summit. As they climbed higher, the brutal cold and thin air made each step more difficult. Every breath felt harder than the last, testing both their bodies and their determination to keep going. From the lower camps, the rest of the expedition watched their progress anxiously. Fellow climber Noel Odell reported seeing Mallory and Irvine through a break in the clouds, approximately 800 feet below the summit, around 1 p.m. on June 8, 1924. This was the last confirmed sighting of the pair. What happened next remains one of mountaineering's greatest mysteries. Did they reach the summit and perish on the way down, or did they fall short of their goal? The truth has been lost to history. When the team realized Mallory and Irvine were not coming back, they searched as much as they could, but with no success. Everest had claimed them, and the mountain kept its secrets. For decades, their disappearance became the tale of legend. Mallory's name became synonymous with the spirit of adventure, and the mystery of his fate fascinated climbers and historians alike. Did he achieve the impossible? Was he the first man to stand on the roof of the world? The lack of answers only deepened the allure. Fast forward to 1999, when an American team set out to solve the mystery. Using modern equipment and historical research, they combed the northern slopes of Everest for clues. On May 1st, they made a discovery that stunned the world. They found George Mallory's body, frozen in time on a rocky slope nearly 27,000 feet above sea level. The icy conditions had preserved him remarkably well. His clothes were tattered but still recognizable, and his skin was stretched tightly over his bones. The position of Mallory's body told a tragic story. He was found face down, his arms outstretched as if trying to break his fall. A rope injury around his waist suggested that he and Irvine had been roped together when they fell. The severe head injury he sustained likely caused his death instantly. Yet the most tantalizing twist was that the small Kodak camera they carried was missing. If found, the camera might hold photographs proving whether they reached the summit before their deaths. Mallory's famous answer to why he wanted to climb Everest, "Because it's there," has become a mantra for adventurers around the world. His story captures the essence of human ambition, the drive to push beyond limits, even in the face of incredible danger. But it also reminds us of the cost. Everest does not give up its secrets easily, and for Mallory, the price of chasing greatness was his life. Mallory's story is a testament to the courage and ambition that Everest demands, but not every climber's legacy is shrouded in mystery. Some became unforgettable landmarks frozen in plain sight. As we move deeper into these tales, the stories only grow more chilling. Now, Let's turn to the haunting tale of a climber whose tragic end has become one of Everest's most unsettling reminders. If you've ever thought about climbing Mount Everest, you've probably come across the name Green Boots. It's one of the most unsettling examples of Everest's deadly grip, and a reminder of how the mountain preserves its victims in a frozen, timeless state. But who were Green Boots, and how did they become such an infamous part of Everest's lore? The story begins on May 10, 1996, one of the deadliest days in Everest's history. That year, multiple expeditions were attempted to summit the mountain from both the southern and northern routes. Among them was a small Indian team climbing the north face of Everest. The team included 28-year-old Sewang Paljur, a police officer from Ladakh and the most likely owner of the boots. His goal was to plant the Indian flag on Everest's summit. Paljur and his teammates were aware of the risks. They had trained extensively and were driven by a sense of national pride. But their journey was much harder than they could have imagined. The northern route's brutal conditions tested their endurance at every step. Even reaching their high camp at over 27,000 feet was an extraordinary achievement. But it was not enough for Paljur. On the morning of May 10th, the three climbers began their final push toward the summit. They were less than 1,000 feet from their goal when they encountered an unthinkable obstacle, a massive storm sweeping across the mountain. High winds and whiteout conditions quickly enveloped them, reducing visibility to near zero. At this altitude, where oxygen levels are critically low, every second spent battling the elements increases the likelihood of disaster. The team made a fateful decision. Against advice from their base camp, they continued upward, determined to reach the summit. It's unclear what drove them, perhaps ambition, perhaps an underestimation of the storm's ferocity. What is clear is that the decision proved fatal. The climbers became disoriented in the storm, separated from each other, and ultimately succumbed to the cold. Paljur's body was later found in a small limestone cave just off the main trail. He was curled up as if seeking shelter, his bright green climbing boots standing out starkly against the snow. While Paljur's identity has never been officially confirmed, those boots would become his defining feature, earning him the nickname Green Boots. For years, Paljur's remains lay undisturbed, frozen in the position he had collapsed in. Climbers passing through the area described the eerie sight of his body, perfectly preserved by the cold. The cave became an informal waypoint on the northern route, with some climbers even using it as a rest stop. Imagine sitting beside him, with the haunting realization that his fate could one day be your own. In the years that followed, Green Boots became a symbol of Everest's harsh reality. Climbers spoke of him with a mix of reverence and fear, seeing him as both a warning and a reminder of the mountain's lethal unpredictability. For many, passing by Green Boots marked a turning point on their ascent, a moment to reckon with the risks they were taking. In 2014, Green Boots was reportedly removed from the cave, likely by a Chinese expedition team. The decision brought relief to Paljur's family, who had endured years of speculation about his identity. Yet, even without the physical reminder, his story endures as one of the most chilling examples of Everest's toll. Green Boots is just one of the estimated 200 climbers whose lives ended on Everest. Each body has its own story, its own set of circumstances, and its own place in the mountain's history. And as global warming continues to melt Everest's glaciers, more of these frozen figures are being revealed, each one a haunting piece of a larger, deadly puzzle. But while Green Boots serves as a silent warning, the next story asks a much harder question. When faced with life or death decisions on Everest, where does human compassion end and self-preservation begin? Let's move on to the controversial tale of David Sharp, whose tragic end sparked one of the most heated debates in mountaineering history. David Sharp's story is one of the most debated events in the history of Everest. It's a tale that forces us to confront difficult questions about morality, survival, and the unspoken rules of the mountain. Unlike Mallory or Green Boots, whose deaths were accepted as part of Everest's harsh realities, Sharp's demise sparked outrage and debate. Just keep watching to understand why it did so. Born in England in 1972, Sharp was not your typical adventurer. A quiet, intellectual man, he was an engineer by trade and a passionate climber at heart. He wasn't interested in fame or sponsorships, and his love for the mountains was deeply personal. Friends and family described him as thoughtful and reserved, someone who climbed not to impress others, but to challenge himself. Sharp began his climbing career modestly, scaling peaks in the United Kingdom before tackling more challenging expeditions. He was a self-taught climber who preferred solo journeys, finding solace in the solitude of the mountains. David's first significant achievement in high-altitude mountaineering came with his summit of Cho Oyu, the sixth highest mountain in the world, standing at over 26,000 feet. Remarkably, he achieved this feat without supplemental oxygen, which showed his above-average physical endurance and mental fortitude. This success propelled him into the world of the 8,000ers, the 14 peaks that rise above 26,000 feet. By 2006, Sharp had built an impressive climbing resume. But Everest, which is the pinnacle of every mountaineer's dream, remained unconquered. He had attempted the mountain twice before. In 2003, bad weather and poor conditions thwarted his efforts, and a second attempt in 2004 ended similarly. Undeterred, David returned to Everest in 2006, ready to take on the challenge again. This time, he joined a low-cost expedition with Asian Trekking, a company known for providing minimal support beyond a climbing permit. True to his self-reliant nature, he chose to climb without a Sherpa and carried only 2 bottles of oxygen, far fewer than the recommended amount. Unlike many climbers on Everest who rely on Sherpas for safety and support, David Sharp was determined to tackle the mountain solo, carrying only minimal supplies. Sharp's decision was a testament to his self-reliant spirit, even if it added to his risks. Sharp's plan was ambitious, even risky. He would climb the northern road of Everest, the same path that had claimed so many lives, including green boots. He would do it alone, without Sherpas or supplemental oxygen, and on a tight schedule. It was a bold decision, one that hinted at his immense confidence and trust in his mountaineering skills. On May 13, 2006, David Sharp embarked on his solo ascent of Mount Everest. The northern route that David chose was known for its harsh conditions. Unlike the southern route, the northern path through Tibet offers fewer chances for rest and recovery. Its exposed ridges, icy slopes, and biting winds make it a difficult journey, especially for David, who was attempting it without supplemental oxygen or significant support. But despite the challenges, Sharp pressed on, determined to fulfill his dream of standing on the world's highest peak. In the early hours of May 14th, it's believed, though not confirmed, that Sharp reached the summit of Everest. For a solo climber without any backup or supplemental oxygen, it must have been a nightmare. The body's demand for oxygen increases dramatically at such altitudes, making every step feel like a monumental effort. Exhausted and suffering from hypoxia due to lack of oxygen, Sharp began his descent into the darkness. Due to worsening weather conditions, David stopped to rest at a small limestone alcove known as Green Boots Cave at around 26,000 feet. This spot, as you know, was where Paljor lay frozen in the cave, serving as a grim landmark. And it was here David Sharp would spend his final hours. Over the next 24 hours, over 40 climbers passed David as he lay slumped in the snow, his body partially frozen and barely responsive. Some mistook him for Green Boots, others checked briefly, but decided he was too far gone to save. At these altitudes, even the smallest delay can threaten another climber's life. The harsh reality of the death zone is that survival often outweighs compassion, and any attempt to save David could have cost other lives. One of the most haunting details of David's ordeal was the video captured by a climber who stopped to check on him. The footage shows David, frostbitten and motionless, with his boots sticking out of the cave entrance. His face must have been partially covered in snow, and though he is alive, his condition is beyond critical. The image is one of profound isolation, a man surrounded by others, yet utterly alone. It's a gut-wrenching image that underscores the harsh realities of Everest. Even surrounded by other climbers, Sharp was utterly alone in his final moments. As the hours passed, David's condition continued to deteriorate. Frostbite ravaged his limbs, and hypoxia clouded his mind. As climbers passed, they heard his faint, slurred responses, but his body shut down rapidly. In the brutal cold and oxygen-starved air, survival was no longer possible. Eventually, Sharp succumbed to the cold. His body remained in the cave for years, a grim companion to Green Boots. Like so many others, he became a frozen monument to the mountain's unforgiving nature. In time, his remains were reportedly moved, but the debate surrounding his death continues to this day. The aftermath of his death ignited a firestorm of controversy. How could so many climbers pass a dying man and not help? Was it a failure of morality, or simply the brutal calculus of survival at extreme altitude? Sir Edmund Hillary, the first man to summit Everest, condemned the events, calling it horrifying that climbers prioritized their own goals over saving a life. But others defended the decision to press on, citing the near-impossible logistics of a rescue in the death zone. Sharp's story forces us to confront uncomfortable questions. Should climbers prioritize their own safety over the lives of others? At what point does ambition cross the line into recklessness? And how much responsibility do we have to those who share the mountain with us? As we turn to our next story, these questions linger. While David Sharp's tragedy exposed the ethical dilemmas of Everest, our next story reveals a different side of the mountain. Imagine setting out with someone you love, each step a shared triumph and test of endurance. This is a story of love, sacrifice, and the devastating cost of chasing a dream. This is the tale of Francis Arsentiev. Francis Yarbrough Di Stefano Arsentiev was born in Honolulu, Hawaii, in 1958. A woman of remarkable determination and spirit, she grew up with a passion for adventure and the outdoors. Francis wasn't a professional mountaineer by trade. She was a 40-year-old mother and an accomplished businesswoman. However, her love for climbing was deeply ingrained, and she had spent years honing her skills on peaks around the world. Her path crossed with Sergei Arsentiev, a Russian mountaineer, during an expedition in the early 1990s. Sergei was an experienced climber, known for his technical skills and quiet confidence. The two shared not only a love for the mountains, but also a deep affection for each other. They married and became an inseparable climbing team, tackling some of the world's most challenging summits together. By 1998, the Arsentievs had set their sights on Mount Everest. Their goal was ambitious. Francis wanted to become the first American woman to summit Everest without the use of supplemental oxygen. This feat had been accomplished by very few, given the immense physical and mental demands of climbing at such altitudes without additional oxygen support. In May of that year, they began their ascent from the north side of Everest, the Tibetan route, which, as you know, is quite risky. Their approach was minimalist and self-reliant. They chose not to employ Sherpa guides or high-altitude porters, carrying their own gear and supplies. This decision reflected their climbing philosophy, but also meant fewer safety nets in an environment where even small mistakes can be fatal. The couple made steady progress up the mountain, establishing camps and acclimatizing to the thin air. On May 22, 1998, after several days of climbing, they initiated their summit push from Camp 6, located at approximately 26,900 feet. The weather was favorable, but the lack of oxygen made every step a monumental effort. As they climbed higher, the effects of extreme altitude without supplemental oxygen became increasingly severe. But despite these challenges, Francis and Sergei persevered. Late on May 22nd or possibly early on May 23rd, accounts vary, they reached the summit of Mount Everest. Francis had achieved her dream, but there was no time for celebration. With exhaustion setting in and conditions worsening, they knew descending was crucial. On the way down, Francis began to falter. The lack of oxygen and sheer exhaustion were taking their toll. Sergei stayed with her, helping her move step by step, but as night fell, Poor visibility separated the couple in the chaos of the death zone. In the thin air and freezing cold, communication is nearly impossible, and visibility is often reduced to mere feet. Sergei made it back to one of the higher camps, believing that Frances was following him. When he realized she was not there, he became alarmed. Meanwhile, Frances was alone, exposed to the elements. On the morning of May 23rd, a team of Uzbek climbers encountered Frances near the second step, at an altitude of about 28,000 feet. She was alive but in very bad condition. She was sitting on a slope, her movements were sluggish, and she was suffering from severe frostbite and hypoxia. The Uzbek climbers faced a tough dilemma. They attempted to assist her, giving her oxygen and trying to help her descend. However, the extreme altitude made it nearly impossible. Every minute they spent with her put their own lives at significant risk. After exhausting their resources and realizing they could do no more, they made the heart-wrenching decision to continue their descent. Meanwhile, Sergei had set out from the camp to find his wife. Carrying oxygen and water, he ascended back into the death zone alone, which to me really showed how much he loved Frances. What exactly transpired remains a mystery, but Sergei did not return. Days later, other climbers found his ice axe and rope above the second step. His body was later discovered lower on the mountain, suggesting that he may have fallen during his desperate attempt to save his wife. Meanwhile, Frances remained where she had collapsed. Climbers who passed her described a haunting sight. Her body frozen in place, sitting upright in the snow, her bright purple jacket standing out against the icy terrain. Her presence became an unsettling marker on the northern route, a reminder of the mountain's lethal grip. In the years that followed, climbers started referring to Frances as Sleeping Beauty, a nickname that reflected the eerie stillness of her resting place. For nearly a decade, her body remained on the mountain until 2007, when British climber Ian Woodall, deeply moved by Frances's story, organized an expedition to bring her body down. Along with his team, he relocated her remains to a more respectful resting place. Frances Arsentiev's story is one of love and sacrifice, a tragic reminder of the risks climbers face in the pursuit of their dreams. The ethical questions raised by her and Sergei's deaths remain topics of debate. How much should climbers risk to help others in such lethal environments? What responsibilities do expedition teams have to one another? While Frances and Sergei's story left climbers with ethical questions, the tale of Joshua Chariot-Kirui demonstrates the dangers of Everest in a new, unforgiving way. In May 2024, the world watched as Joshua Chariot-Kirui, a Kenyan mountaineer and senior relationship manager at Kenya Commercial Bank, prepared to embark on a daring expedition to summit Mount Everest without supplemental oxygen. For most climbers, this is an extraordinary feat, one that only the most seasoned dare to attempt. For Kirui, the challenge was a natural progression in his mountaineering journey. At 40 years old, Kirui was a figure of quiet determination and remarkable focus. He was no stranger to high-altitude climbing. In September 2023, he summited Manaslu, the world's 8th highest mountain, standing at 26,781 feet as part of his preparation for Everest. Manaslu tested his physical endurance and mental resilience, and its successful summit bolstered his confidence for the ultimate challenge, conquering Everest without supplemental oxygen. Kirui's Everest attempt was deeply symbolic. As a Kenyan, he carried not just his personal ambitions, but also the hopes of a nation that rarely featured in the high-stakes world of mountaineering. For many, his climb was a testament to Kenya's spirit of endurance and ambition, qualities often celebrated in its world-class runners, but now represented on the snow-laden slopes of Everest. Kirui, accompanied by his trusted guide, Nawang Sherpa, began their ascent on the Southeast Ridge Route, one of the most popular yet perilous paths to Everest's summit. They moved with meticulous precision, acclimatizing slowly to avoid the debilitating effects of altitude sickness. Despite his Kenyan heritage and years of climbing experience, Kirui was entering the thin air world above 26,000 feet in the infamous death zone, where oxygen levels are dangerously low. Their summit push began in the early hours of May 23, 2024, from the South Col, the final camp before the summit. At 25,918 feet, the South Col is a desolate and windswept plateau, a stark reminder of the mountain's unforgiving nature. From here, every step upward would be a battle against gravity, exhaustion, and the elements. As Kirui and Nawang ascended, the conditions grew increasingly challenging. The air was razor-thin, and temperatures fell to bone-chilling levels. Final communications put them around Bishop's Rock, a treacherous rock face that requires intense concentration and careful footing just a couple hundred feet below the summit. What happened next remains shrouded in mystery. But by late afternoon on May 23rd, reports indicated that Kirui had not returned to the South Colon. Radio contact with his guide, Nawang Sherpa, had also ceased. The sudden and unpredictable nature of Everest's weather may have played a critical role. Their last known position was at Bishop Rock, just 160 feet below the summit. At that point, Joshua was exhibiting abnormal behavior. According to Mingma Sherpa, chairman of 7 Summit Treks, Joshua refused to return or even consume the bottled oxygen reserved for emergencies. It took rescuers days to finally find Joshua's body. He was found in a crevasse just below the summit, his body frozen in place. His face bore the signs of extreme frostbite, and his oxygen-deprived body showed the telltale rigidity of hypoxia. Nawang Sherpa's whereabouts remained unknown. Some speculated that he had succumbed to the elements while descending alone or while attempting to assist Kirui. Kirui's death sent ripples through both the mountaineering world and his homeland. His family's decision to leave his body on the slopes of Everest also reignited a painful truth about Everest. Retrieving bodies from the mountain is an almost impossible feat. Once climbers perish in the death zone, that is, above 26,247 feet, their remains often remain where they fell, frozen in time and place. The thin air, extreme cold, and perilous terrain make recovery missions incredibly dangerous. Even the most experienced climbers struggle with basic movements in this environment, let alone the dangerous task of transporting a body weighing over 176 pounds, now encased in ice and snow. In addition to physical risks, costs can be prohibitive. Recovery missions can run into tens of thousands of dollars, requiring helicopters, specialized equipment, and teams willing to brave Everest's hostility. For many families, such expenses are insurmountable, leaving their loved ones to rest eternally on the slopes. Kirui's death also highlighted another sobering reality. Climate change is reshaping Everest in ways that bring both danger and discovery. Over the past few decades, global warming has led to significant glacial melting on Everest. Temperatures that were once consistently freezing now fluctuate, destabilizing the ice and snow that have long preserved the mountain's secrets. This phenomenon is causing hidden bodies of climbers from past expeditions to emerge, many of them lost for decades, such as this one. But this grim unveiling comes with risks. As ice recedes, crevasses widen, and formerly stable routes become more dangerous. The exposed bodies also serve as a not-so-gentle reminder of the mountain's growing environmental instability, and a sign that even Everest is not immune to the effects of global climate change. In this age of increasing accessibility and environmental instability, the lessons Everest holds are more relevant than ever. It challenges us to reflect not only on the pursuit of personal goals, but also on our responsibilities towards each other, the environment, and the shared stories that define our humanity. So, as we leave behind these tales of triumph and tragedy, we ask you, what compels us to push beyond the limits of safety and certainty? And what would you risk to chase your dream? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay bold and live brave.